And welcome back to Law School Tech Talk. Sitting in for the vendor-caused crisis-bound David Dickens. I'm Jonathan Ezor. I am joined today by my co-hosts Ben Chapman of Emory and Debbie Ginsberg of Chicago Kent. We will be talking much about the just completed CALI conference, but we thought we'd lead in with a little bit of news and talk about some of the implications. This week, actually just the other day, it was announced that the latest acquisition to the Google family of companies is Dropcam, which is a personal home video monitoring solution for people to have cameras set up in their own homes. Google is putting it under its Nest automated thermostat part of its business, ostensibly and possibly just to give people a full home monitoring and control solution. But in thinking about it, it raises yet another issue of how much information and how many channels of information does Google have. It's a topic of great interest to privacy professionals between video now and how the use of your home heating system, Google Fiber, which is all the data of those communities, Google running the Wi-Fi in Starbucks now, plus Android and everything else. But it's also of relevance to law schools because more and more of our schools are standardizing on Google Apps, Google Mail, and as Debbie was saying it before we started, there's some good security and resources reasons there, but we have to balance those with the potential for privacy issues. So, Debbie, why don't you go back to what you were just saying before we went on the air?
Right. So we are a Google Apps for Education law school, and as far as the user goes, this has been a pretty good experience. Though we know that Google's not used as often in law firms, for example, but our students really like it, and generally our faculty are pretty satisfied. One of the reasons we chose it is we had been doing Microsoft Exchange here, but it was going to cost us a lot of money to replace the Exchange server and upgrade it. Money from students' tuition that might be better spent on some other things that would more directly benefit them. So we had to figure out how we wanted to spend their money and how we wanted the resources to go. And our main campus also is a Google institution, and we wanted to standardize. We understand, of course, there are privacy implications, and we've worked those out with our own general counsel here at IIT. But at the same time, if we're trying to maintain our own servers, then we have to make sure they're secure against ever-increasing threats and fewer resources from the law school point of view. There are law schools out there that might have one IT person, and that's not the level of staffing that could reasonably maintain a server against hacker threats. So do we try to protect our privacy from hackers, or do we try to protect our privacy from Google? And it's a weird space that we're finding ourselves in.
There are, of course, other solutions besides Gmail on the one hand and one's own Exchange server. There are, for example, a number of vendors, including Microsoft itself, running hosted Exchange situations, particularly for the high bandwidth that we have available to us now. They work fairly well. Many of them come with Outlook licenses. And I know that the firm that I was counsel to a few years ago shifted its internal email to a hosted Exchange system because it didn't have the resource, and it worked out fairly well. So it isn't an either or, but on the other hand, there are plenty of good reasons to standardize on a vendor that provides a lot of different services. And free is always better than not free from a budget perspective, at least in the short term.
Right. So, yeah. And there are things that are available now that weren't available at the time under consideration. But so, if you're making the decision today, you'll have even more options available.
And I was going to say what we've done at Emory because of Emory Healthcare and because of just enormous concerns around HIPAA, we're migrating to Office 365, which is Microsoft's hosted solution for those reasons. And so we're going with Microsoft, even though there are a lot of us who are big fans of the Google app offerings. We're in the Microsoft camp on this one, and it's not bad. It'll be a while before we see the Microsoft thermostat or Microsoft security cameras. So we won't have to wrestle with that immediately.
All right. And this was actually discussed at CALI because I did a presentation with Emily Barney on Google Apps and the different things you can do. And this is one of the questions that we get whenever we present on Google Apps.
So excellent segue. Thank you. I was unfortunately unable to attend the CALI conference, but I think I know our audience would love to hear about what you said, what you saw, and where you think things are going.
Dan, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm glad to start. I thought we had two terrific keynote speakers.
Agreed.
I think they were both intentionally picked for the provocative nature of their presentations. And so on the first day, we had Jason Scott, who I remember him describing himself as an angry archivist. And on the second day, we had Dorothea Salo, who is a professor of library and information services. And so the first keynote speaker was all about what happens when Google buys up a company, or when someone buys up a company that has collected, that is user-powered, it's full of user content, and then all of a sudden that company closes its doors and users are given a very short period of time to extract all of their data, which is what was used to build the value of the company, of course, but they're given a short period of time to extract their data and recover it. And Jason Scott, who works with the archive.org, has a fascinating and kind of aggressive response to that, and I enjoyed listening to his discussion of that. What did you think, Deb?
I liked his discussion. I thought he had some really good points about what's being lost when this data is no longer available. Now, he's an archivist, so he wants to keep all of the data. As a librarian, I'm like, ooh, how do we access that data? And there's some data that's worth keeping more than others, but in today's world where you can have many petabytes of information preserved quite easily, he's in a position where as long as he can get access to this, and he had a lot of difficulty at some companies getting access to this data, he can preserve quite a bit of it. He works for archive.org. They do things like record all TV, which made me think they must have lots and lots of copies of commercials, but then they have a lot of other material that would otherwise be difficult to get, and I wonder how eventually they're going to make it available. Right now, they make it available by letting you search TV news, which is an interesting kind of search. So if you're looking for a news broadcast, that's something that's available to you through that. So he's an interesting point that way. It was a great discussion and led to further discussions afterwards whenever it came up, like, oh, I was using the service and it went away. We always sure to discuss how we preserve the data from services that we have lost, and we're able to transfer them to someplace else. So he definitely started a lot of discussions.
And let's not forget, of course, the Internet Wayback Machine, archive.org's wonderful resource that I know I've taught and many other lawyers teaching legal research focus on as a way of seeing the time capsule of the web going back now to 1996. It's an astonishing tool, and we were talking a little bit earlier before we went on about, and I guess that also came up at the conference, about the tech savvy of law students. And I will say most of the ones I teach have never seen or heard of the Internet Wayback Machine, and it is an eye-opener for them.
Well, and that is a nice segue into day two's keynote, Dorothea Salo, the purple squirrel, which honestly, that was a concept that was new to me. I had not, once she described it, I've read a number of job descriptions seeking the
mythical
purple squirrel, the mythical purple squirrel, but I didn't know that term. So a purple squirrel is when you ask for someone who is a library cataloger, a reference librarian, an access services guru, a project planner, and also codes Python, Perl, MySQL, etc. We've all seen those job descriptions. They throw in everything and the kitchen sink. Uh, but the segue in her talk from that to this idea of assuming that people at a certain of a certain age are, you know, the quote unquote digital natives, and that they inherently understand all of these things through some magical process, whereas people above a certain age, the digital immigrants, will never understand these processes. And she talks about how damaging that is, how damaging the purple squirrel myth is. And I really urge everyone who did not have a chance to go to CALI to take a look at her talk. It's again, it's intentionally provocative. I mean, the tone is provocative, uh, but it's worth it. It's really interesting, or I really thought it was interesting. What did you think, Deb?
I really enjoyed her talk. You know, she gets to the reality of things. She said, here's some problems, here's some solutions. And she's also aware that, you know, since she's coming from a librarian point of view, there's aspects of librarianship that's highly gendered. You may have noticed that many of us are women. But she was aware that terminology that we use, like digital natives, has implications beyond, you know, we've used the word native, but hey, when we use the word native before, we usually mean someone you know, of a different race and someone that we think less of, and here we're using digital natives. What are we saying about young people when we use this word to refer to them, beyond the fact that we then put these expectations of knowledge on them that they simply haven't really been taught? So it was a good talk all around, and once the CALI sessions are posted to YouTube, which should be within the next couple of weeks, definitely worth checking that out. What was your favorite session then at CALI?
Honestly, I really enjoyed the Purple Squirrel session very much, and I wouldn't point to a favorite session, but a series of sessions around the role of the instructional technologist and sort of this developing understanding that we need a new set of expertise within the law school. And I enjoyed those sessions. I think those are really important to helping law schools understand how to navigate through this new environment that we find ourselves in. So that, I would just say, that series, sort of, that it was sort of an informal track, if you will, of instructional technology presentations. And what about yourself?
There were a lot of things on instructional designers, and I wish I'd spent more time on it, but as we start migrating on those sessions, I did go to a couple, as we start moving to more distance learning, there are ways that law faculty are going to need to think about how they teach in a more formal and more
pedagogically
justified way. And you know, right now, I teach what I teach. I have this way of doing it, and they may not have everything in a particular stylized rubric. But when you're online, things have to be delineated much more precisely, and making that transition can be really difficult unless you have an expert available to you in your law school, like an instructional designer. And I'm hearing more about how useful a very well-trained instructional designer, someone with a lot of experience, is for helping law schools make that transition. So I think that's going to be an interesting path to follow as that develops.
You know, I wonder in the discussions whether there is any talk about getting metrics on what's working, because certainly in the world of teaching, there's a lot of discussion about evaluation metrics and being able to measure success and all those things and the mandates on that front. At the same time, there's a lot of possible methods being talked about, whether it's last year's trendy flipped classroom discussions or all the other things. I think that all educators are somewhat skeptical of the next new thing, especially those faculty members who may have been teaching through many next new things. some of which turned out to be worthwhile, some of which didn't. And I wonder what, if any, discussion there was about evaluating the results of these types of methodologies, A, to see which are worth investing time and money in, and B, as a way of helping to convince faculty members that the ones that are working in a demonstrable way and better than what they do now in a demonstrable way. The metrics are very important.
But historically, John, we at least the law schools I'm familiar with have not collected many metrics at all, even in the traditional classroom.
True. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say one of the things that the folks from St. Thomas hit on was that they were trying to measure student satisfaction with a flipped approach to the library portion of their legal writing introduction for first years. And one of the things that they ran into was the fact that they really had nothing to compare it against, because they really hadn't been measuring those things. One of the things that I think is happening as people transition to blended learning or alternative approaches is they're discovering in that space it's very common to talk about metrics. It seems less common to talk about measuring learning or teaching efficacy in traditional teaching environments, within the law school at least.
Although that, certainly over the last year, I know the ABA on down,
right,
pushing very hard for law schools to enhance their metrics to see their students' mastery, etc., formal requirements for doing so. So the discussion's happening on that side of things,
right.
And I think it may make it both necessary and easier to raise it in the context of these new tools and methodologies.
Right. Switching a bit from that, I did want to just a shout out to John Mayer and the CALI people for the Access to Justice presentation that I went to on Saturday, and they're working on magnifying the reach of their Access to Justice software package, which has now served something like 2 million people. It's an amazing success story that I don't think is very well publicized, and they're in the process of sort of rewriting it from scratch, and that was appealing to me on both a social justice level and a geeky level, as they're trying to incorporate some hot docs functionality, some things like that.
Or hot docs alternatives. I know that, and this has been, I was wondering how far that's gotten. A2J, which is just a phenomenal initiative. It's more than an initiative now. It's a great tool, but I know one of the big challenges has been it required hot docs, which is, I guess, Windows only, in order to generate the documents that came out of the interviews that were built in A2J. I know that they've been working on replacing that with an in-house platform-neutral document generator. Was that demonstrated, Ben? Are they at the point
John
where that's...
talked a lot about it and showed some sort of mock-ups and things like that. It wasn't, and so it does seem like they're making good progress on it, but there's still much more work to be done. It's an ambitious project, it looked like. So,
well, I'm sure John would want me to remind people that think CALI is just the CALI lessons, that tools like A2J, which also come out of CALI and its resources and its creativity, are making real differences for unrepresented litigants, for students who are learning literally around the country, and it's one more benefit of CALI, I say as a fully disclosed board member who unfortunately couldn't make the meeting. Well, thank you both for that, and hopefully we can also have John on again in the near future to talk about maybe when it's ready to show. I did want to bring back something that we had talked about in getting ready for today, which was the difficulty in getting ready for today. as part of our mostly weekly doing this show this year, we've switched to Google Hangouts for a lot of good reasons having to do with the ease of people following and the posting and the social media. But we've also seen, it's got to be at least 4 times during this school year, that Google has changed its interface on the operator side and to the point where there have been weeks where we haven't been able to start on time because we couldn't figure out how. And obviously we are not an unsophisticated bunch of people, but it's also not a particularly easy interface, and it keeps changing. And the implications that that sort of thing has for the kinds of distance learning and other methods that that we believe in and others are trying to get less technically interested faculty members to do.
Yeah. No, I think this is the reason why I don't think many people are using Hangouts for mission critical teaching. But I don't know, Debbie, are you all doing that, or you use Adobe products for that, right? Or...
Not really. Our main campus offers some Adobe products, which have its own issue in that we don't have the call-in. So if someone can't do their mic or speakers aren't working, there's no backup. We just got Google Hangouts back as part of our Google package, but just Hangouts and not Hangouts on Air, which is enabled separately. And everything, like any part of Google and Google Hangouts that's outside the basic part of Google Apps for Education, so more so, has to be considered very carefully by the administrator before being enabled. And because this is outside and also controlled by our main campus, we only sometimes have parts of it. But in my day-to-day work with Google Hangouts, yeah, it can be a little frustrating as things move around, and I just got to sit there and figure it out again. And this is a problem with Google in general, as I brought up on my presentation. We'll teach people how to use something, and then sometime during the school year, how it works will completely change. While I like the upgrades sometimes, it can be frustrated from a learning technology perspective. So one of the things I'm hoping to do going forward, both in my school and hopefully maybe finding a way to work with CALI, is sort of teach our students, this is the reality of where you're going to be practicing. It's a changing reality. How do you develop your technology skills so that you can work in an environment which can change on you overnight?
Wow, it's a tall order.
I know CALI has considered in the past trying to put together its own white labeled or otherwise video conferencing, video teaching system, and it's not the best direction. So we're all trying different things, and they have different strengths and weaknesses, and those strengths and weaknesses unfortunately change from day to day and week to week, which makes it very difficult to create training materials, to make the case, to do a demo, and ultimately to use these tools for the purpose that we want, education and knowledge sharing. This has been really interesting, and thank you both for reporting back and for being part of the CALI conference. Look forward to watching presentations once they do go up on the CALI.org YouTube channel, and we'll send out the link, I think, once those are available. I don't have a date for our next show. We will see if we go through the summer. But as always, thank you to David, thank you to Ben and Debbie and everyone else involved. A special shout out, as always, to CALI and everyone there for their support, for their leadership. And thank you to all of you for watching live and otherwise. And we'll see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Stop it.